democratic backsliding combated by political dissent. So democracy is being challenged at the global level as democratic backsliding unravels this vital governing style. The Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, a nonprofit organization teaching the public on how to uphold ethics by identifying and addressing the most critical ethical issues of today, defines democratic backsliding as a process of regime change towards an individual or select few that make and exercise the political power, but the public has more arbitrary and repressive role. This process typically restricts the space for public contestation and public participation in the process of governmental selection. And this erosion is the start of a declining integrity for democratic values in institutions in this political system. Some specific factors exacerbating this democratic backsliding are disruption of fair elections, suppression of dissent and constriction of action, corrupt legislation, and injustices faced by marginalized peoples and minorities, more specifically indigenous peoples. As Miles Glassius, a professor of international relations in the Department of Politics specializing in political science, finds that a key contributor to authoritarian regimes is, quote, an absence of free and fair elections in which there's a active participation or disrupting or sabotaging of accountability. And this active disruption can currently be seen in Russia. Alexei Navalny is a Russian opposition leader, anti-corruption activist, and a political prisoner for his courageous acts. He organized anti-government demonstrations and ran for office to advocate for reforms against corruption in Russia and President Vladimir Putin, and to challenge his governance. As of recently, Navalny has died, and it is speculated that he has been killed by Vladimir Putin. These claims hold true, as before Navalny was imprisoned on what he says are fabricated charges of embezzlement to stop his activism. Putin attempted to kill him through a poisoning and tried to suppress and extinguish Navalny's movement. Navalny's poisoning and suspected murder demonstrates how, in this transition toward authoritarian governments, there is a suppression of political dissent, and elections are corrupted and construed to ensure that these officials and office holders are never challenged or overtaken. The stimulus piece, Confrontation on the Bridge, by Jacob Lawrence, depicts members of the 1965 Selma to Montgomery marches for voting rights. And they are met with opposition by the state troopers, who are depicted as a wolf or a snarling dog on the Edmund Prentice Bridge. And this work of art brings to light the fact that in the United States in the 1960s, there were many prevalent laws and bills that kept minorities from having equal rights or input on these governmental issues. Lawrence highlights this systemic issue relating to racism during this time period in which this corrupt legislation prevented a democracy from incorporating all of its members' views and promoted an inhibition of freedoms and the right to free speech. This directly correlates to democratic backsliding, as within this historical context, the United States democracy was built on the principles not of the full population, but of those that they deemed fit to give input. And these concepts prove that with corrupt legislation, these governments shift further and further from democracy, as not everyone's views are allowed or accounted for. Similarly, the other stimulus piece, Eloise Cobell, A Small Measure of Justice by Melinda Janko, focuses on the mismanagement and withholding of Native American funds, one facet of the fundamental problem regarding indigenous injustices within the United States. In this article, Janko states that James Magdog Kennerly, a Blackfeet Indian living on the Blackfeet Reservation, quote, lived in a modest home with running water despite his 300 acres of oil-producing land. Over $6,000 of oil was taken from his land, and he only received $98. Kennerly, like many others within this community, would go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs looking for answers to his questions, and he would never see justice. Janko uses the Blackfeet Reservation's mismanaged funds to prove that even today, indigenous injustices plague our society, and without these individuals willing to hold the government accountable for their unscrupulous actions, democracy will continue to freefall. However, this brings us to the solution, being political dissent, as Merrill Perelman, writing for the Columbia Journalism Review with a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri, defines political dissent as a dissatisfaction with or an opposition to the policies of a governing body. The expression of dissent may take forms from vocal disagreement to civil disobedience to the use of violence. And these previously mentioned factors leading to this democratic backsliding can be remediated through political dissent. In the face of authoritarian regimes and movement towards a governing style of such, Navalny, despite his death, still serves as an example of the power that political disobedience has, as Navalny sparked a movement that not only got the Russian people on his side, but started a wave of forward-thinking Russians because of his courage and refusal to back down when challenged. As Navalny states, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Likewise, confrontation on the bridge in the 1965 Selma to Montgomery marches for voting rights illustrates that this systemic change is possible if these individuals possess moral courage. Although the marchers were met with opposition from the state troopers, these individuals persevered and refused to back down. And this created a government more just for everyone. As the results were seen, as History.com alludes to, that 6 days later, on March 15th, President Lyndon B. Johnson went on national television to pledge his support to the Selma protesters and call for the passage of the new voting rights bill that was introduced in Congress. Lastly, Eloise Cobell's battle with the government portrays that actively opposing these corrupt governmental practices through the judicial system can stop these unjust acts, as Cobell's role as a dissident ushered in a wave of change as she won a settlement of $3.4 billion that was all given back to these Native communities. And Cobell's willingness to take action is what led to this change. This shows that there's a necessity for courageous individuals to take action and utilize political dissent to prevent democratic backsliding. As Barbara Folk, a professor of politics at Humboldt College, remarks that dissent implies both the possibility and the opportunity to engage with and criticize the status quo, to literally speak truth to power. And to conclude, Gandhi encapsulates this idea by stating that you need to be the change that you seek to create. Thank you.
Nice.